We tend to not like being bad at things because as adults, our brain isn't wired for change. Looking mediocre or bad at something is just going to happen when you first start. You don't have to be the expert in the room.
Welcome back to Educator University. You know how powerful music can be in classrooms, but for today's guest, it became so much more. After a classroom injury left her unable to communicate, she used music to rebuild her skills and discovered a new way to help kids learn. Emily Cadiz is a teacher, musician, and founder of Prelude Early Learning. She's turned her experience into an approach that helps children build literacy through music, and she's here to share practical tips every teacher can use. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Annie. I really appreciate that lovely intro.
Yes. Well, all of it is so inspiring. And I think as teachers, we just want to know kind of a little bit of your backstory. You began your classroom journey in special ed, and then you had a classroom injury that affected your brain dramatically. Can you share a little bit about that experience and how it shapes what you do now?
Sure. As many teachers know, classrooms have changed over the years, and they just have. There is a tolerance for behaviors that can not just impede students' learning or the learning of others, but the health and safety of other people in the classroom. And, it's probably time for a more holistic conversation around that subject. But for me, this happened in a time period when I think the conversation was just emerging. So I was injured in the classroom pretty significantly, left without my ability to speak cohesively for about a year and a half. It was just that ability to turn thoughts into words. It didn't come back after a few months, and then it became kind of panic stricken. I became panic stricken because it wasn't just coming back, and it was really impacting my ability to live, retain my job, retain a career, retain a job. It was pretty profound what ended up happening. It turned my whole world upside down. But I'm also an individual who's curious about different alternative ways in which we can access parts of our brain, and always have been, hence my work in special education, specifically with students who had language barriers. And I began going down a path of using music to regain some of these skills, to be able to enhance my cognitive abilities. And it was working. It was working in a profound way in my life. And that was the start of being, I guess, an entrepreneur or a founder in educational technology, educational curriculum, unbeknownst to me. That was the start of it. I had to wait a little while till I realized it, but that was the start. When I started studying this, I went back to school to really put the pieces together in a more complete way. I realized that the siloed ways in which we approach education, which really is the intersectionality of healthcare and human development, is so removed from those who are doing the research into brain development or into the areas that would be impacted by alternative approaches to teaching and learning. We tend to keep everyone in a very fractured space. And because the jobs are so demanding when you do work with children or with families, we often don't have time to step away and go, well, how are these pieces connected? For me, I was given that gift through an injury, and I got to take a big step back. But I don't think I would have made the connections to music and language development and early literacy had I not been on the outside watching these rates of early language and early literacy decline so profoundly while screen time was skyrocketing. And this was in spite of the pandemic. This was happening before and is certainly happening after. That was the gift that injury gave me, was being able to step away and say, hey, I think there's something here going on, and you can see it from the outside. And it just happened to be that my path back to being an active participant in the teaching and learning community was by just pursuing what was giving me those skills back.
Yeah, and I think it's inspiring you're saying it's a gift because it was a pretty traumatic experience, but to come out of it and say, I've learned something and that you've not only learned something about yourself, but about education and how students learn is really a unique perspective to have. And I think teachers listening might be thinking, well, I'm going through something right now, and maybe I can see a gift out of this. I can see an opportunity. Like you said, you became an entrepreneur, you built something. Can you talk a little bit about what you've built?
The premise is that we have had screens being used as a service for quite some time. At first, it was screens in movie theaters, then it was screens as televisions. Then it was the screen became a computer, and the screen then became a mobile device, and now the screen is everywhere. It's omnipotent. There is no screen-free world at all. And so even parents who are like, "Oh, my child is screen-free," no, they're not. You're on a screen. There's screens for your work. There's screens just to go to the bank or drive through anything. They're everywhere. How we use them, how we introduce them has never really been well thought out. We have continued to introduce them as a service. The service started as entertainment. That service translated into like a quasi, what we call edutainment, which is not a real category. And that needs to just get out of here. And now we're seeing individuals really present materials and say, oh, our screen can teach your child to do X, Y, and Z. And while that may be true in very, very small amounts, it is not really the best way to introduce screens. And it certainly isn't addressing the fact that screens often are doing more harm than good. Screens are not going to replace human beings. That service mentality of a screen being used to pacify or quiet a child or teach a child or get them out of your hair or give you a break, that's just going to be there. I mean, let's just start with the premise that it's not going anywhere. It's right now, screens are used about 3 hours a day for the average 3-year-old in the United States. So we'll start there. That takes away about 1,800 words, both spoken and heard from a 3-year-old's daily conversations. As an early childhood educator and special educator, I know that reading starts with talking. It does not start with script. And so when you put a cap on a child's ability to develop those skills by flexing the phonological loop, not only just hearing words, but using words and having good communication partners, you're inhibiting their ability to have a fully functioning brain by kindergarten to be ready for literacy. And I think I've wandered from this question a little bit, but knowing that that was the core problem, and there were two sides to it. One was the lag that screens were creating before they got to kindergarten. And also, so how were we going to start teaching to this lag and closing this gap before children got to kindergarten and first grade? And then the other side to it was the screens being used as the service in the home. What education was being given to parents? How do you broach the conversation without relying fully on shame to say you need to just stop, you need to be done with this? How do you approach it with the same way in which we found effective drug awareness programs to be used or sex education programs to be used? Abstinence tends to not work very well. It doesn't really deter people from the behavior that we're trying to avoid or decrease. So with that past knowledge, we know that just telling people to stop using screens is not going to work. So it was that two-sided approach that I was seeing. And then the company created a system, what we call a blended learning system, that addressed both sides. And blended learning systems tend to focus on introducing concepts offline, human to human, person to person, and using screens as a tool to reinforce whatever was learned offline by an adult or a parent or a family member. Um, and that blended system over time has become something that we have found to be incredibly effective. It engages families at a much higher rate because we know they're using this tool already. So it's a matter of just, hey, we're going to um, use something that we know you're already using at a very high rate, but start turning the dial and giving you better options. And then we're also going to empower teachers, especially those daycare providers and younger teachers in younger ages, to approach early literacy from a language to literacy hybrid model, which means letters come last, script comes last. Let's focus on the gaps that children are presenting, which are typically phonological based at this point.
Yeah, and I really am intrigued by this idea of you kind of saying, well, there's going to be screens. So let's figure out how to use them because I think there is a gap in that market in terms of we know screens aren't the best for us, but we, like you said, they're part of our world now. And so we have to teach students how do we interface with those? How do we work with them in a way that helps us? And And giving parents and students the education they need around that is really powerful. So yeah, that was really a big gap in the market.
Oh, it's gigantic, and it's still
Yeah.
I mean, you have got so many, entrepreneurs saying, "Oh, I've made this thing, and it's gonna teach your child how to read, and it's gonna teach your child how to regulate their emotions," and I'm like, who is in charge of telling everyone that there is very little evidence behind these claims? Like, who is monitoring this? And the answer to that question is there isn't anyone. We work specifically with the National Institutes of Health, and we work with Head Start because we work with people who are looking to make an impact, a very large impact with some valid claims. I'm very tired of people entering this market who've probably never been in a classroom, who are far from really understanding human development, making claims about products with no teeth. There's nothing in there. They haven't done efficacy trials. They haven't worked with healthcare providers. They are looking to do one thing, and that is make some money. And that's unfortunate that we don't have a body overseeing this prolific amount of technology coming at the early childhood education space, and no one's saying, well, show us what you've it.
Yeah, and I think that teachers will appreciate hearing that you were a teacher and you have such a vast experience in that, bringing that to what you're doing now. Like you said, we need more educators in these fields, whether it's technology or even professional development. I think we need more teachers coming in and saying, we're actually in the classroom or we've been in the classroom for a long time. We know what we're talking about. I think that brings a different lens to what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we work on an interdisciplinary team. Like, I don't come at the healthcare angle by myself. I work with a lot of pediatric SLPs, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, daycare providers. I have a special education background. We have individuals who are English language learning specialists. We have educational research specialists. We definitely come at this cohesively as a group, none of us being, 100% right in any given situation, that it's all just a matter of how do we approach it from these different angles. And then working with people in the business field, like this is another beast, right? In the world of education, we get education, but how do you then take something that you've made and then become a business out of that? That is a different skill set. Not everything you do over here transfers over, and you do have to be a good listener, which sometimes teachers are not. We're not good listeners, but we do have to be a good listener. You have to be humble, and you have to be okay with being bad at something for a little while.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about your journey into entrepreneurship. Could you share what was the moment you're like, okay, I'm going to make a business out of it. I had an idea and now I'm going to make it into a business that's profitable, you know?
Oh, I'm still making that decision every day. um, and that was really funny. It's hard, especially as you get older and you get secure in your field, and you're like, well, hey, I'm not a brand new teacher anymore. I'm actually making a little extra money. I've taken on some other things, and now I can afford to do X, Y, and Z. And I've got health care. And yeah, there is a lot to be said about working your way into becoming a master teacher and being economically supported, especially when the world is doing this around you all the time. With that said, it does not get lost on me that many people are working incredibly hard to send their children to college. Um, and you get to that point and maybe you can't afford to do it. You've prepared hundreds of other children to go to college, whether it's the start of their journey in education or maybe that last year or into whatever field they're going into. And oftentimes you get to that last stage as a teacher, as an administrator, and it is hit like it hits you like a ton of bricks that you may not be able to afford your own children going on. And that is something that, you wrestle with. How do you compensate for that lack of cash in your life? So it didn't like starting a business is definitely I think a lot of teachers, a lot of people in education dabble in the idea of doing that, but you are torn between those two things, that being, secure in your position, and hey, I may not be able to afford the things that I want for my children or the next generation.
Yeah, it's taking a sacrifice in some ways to your personal goals for this bigger goal that you have
Mhm.
for the future of sounds like the way students learn, though. You have a bigger goal that you see and a vision that you have.
Yeah. So basically, you're going to work two jobs. That's how you're going to work two jobs. You're going to work two jobs if you're in a school. You're going to work two jobs if you're having to take professional development courses to get another endorsement to work up whatever. If you're going to start a business, it's just two jobs. You're working two jobs. You're working two jobs no matter what. I mean, if you're in education, you're always working more than one job. That is just a fact. So you get to decide what that other job's going to look like.
And I really appreciate your honesty with that because teachers might be thinking, maybe I want to be an entrepreneur. And like there it's definitely got its ups and downs. So I think it's good for us to kind of be like, well, maybe like just thinking about the whole picture, especially just even financially in terms of sacrifices we may have to make if that's a choice that people want to do. And there's other options too if people want to move out of education too. So they can kind of think through or if within their field and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
we talk about growth mindset all the time, but we tend to get really stuck in the problem if we're faced with overwhelming problems. Like you are a very smart person. Whoever's listening, you're a very smart person. You have been able to do your job very well. If this is not a match for you in your life anymore, there are opportunities outside of this world and you can pursue them and it will be okay. And that's the end of that sentence.
Yes. That's so powerful. Thank you for saying that. For everyone listening, that was very, very, very nice to hear.
I actually became an entrepreneur not because I sought it out, but because it happened to me.
Yeah.
I would not wait to get to that point. That is not the best way or the most exciting way to start a business, but it is one of the more profound ways to start a business when you are faced with deciding whether you're going to share something with the world and possibly make a positive effect on the next generation at a different level, or whether you're just going to keep that to yourself and just try to keep things together. That too is just enough. But I think I would have preferred to maybe have thought about it a little bit more and come to terms with it on my own timeline.
Yeah, yeah, I was kind of thrust upon you with the situation that happened to you.
Yeah, I would have stayed in the classroom probably for another, well, I probably would have retired from the classroom. Yeah.
Yeah, that really was a change in your path, a really big path change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is an
yeah, yeah, and I think one thing that you mentioned in the beginning, it was a gift, and I think that that is, like, something that I'm like, "Wow," like, when I hear your story, I'm thinking, "Wow," and you really had to have that mentality because not only did you gain your communication skills, but you were able to use music, and that's kinda what you do now. You use a lot of music to help students learn in this kind of platform that you've created. Can you talk a little more about the music that you use and how that encourages learning and literacy?
Yeah, when you're talking about early literacy, you're really talking about language development. You're not talking about script or letters. You're talking about sound. Sound is, it's so complicated. It's far more complicated than even script, but it's also, in my opinion, a lot more fun. I mean, if you think of sound like Play Doh and that you get to like twist it and move it and make things out of it and color it in different ways, it can become this super tool that you use in early literacy that is more effective than speech. It's far more effective than speech because it lights up more areas of the brain. I think we hear a lot of people, administrators, school districts talking about the right brain initiative. Please stop. You sound foolish. Stop talking like that. The right brain is not an accessory to the left brain. It's not a pair of earrings. It's when you light the right brain up with the left brain, with more areas of the brain, you are a more effective instructor. Period. That's just the end of that statement. And it is fact. It is a healthcare fact. We use music to get language back on board for people who've had, strokes and dementia, Alzheimer's, regardless. There's melodic intonation therapy to use to reclaim your language skills. There's neurologic music therapy used for integrating language for the first or introducing it for the first time for students. And this isn't, and let me make it really clear. I don't approach this as a therapist. I don't approach this as a music educator. Yes, I have a master's in music composition and inclusive music practices, but I don't approach this from a siloed stance. Like it is not someone else's job to use music. in the classroom. It is not the other teacher's job. And I don't care if your voice is bad. You're not Adele. You wouldn't be in a kindergarten classroom if you were. No one wants to hear you sing, so stop singing it circle time. That's not a concert anyone bought a ticket for. Use it to get your classroom to move in ways that you need them to move to acquire these new skills, but do it in a way that children are invited to sing to you. This is not about you singing at them or having someone else come and sing to them or lead music for them. It's about you getting them to flex that phonological loop and light up more parts of the brain more often. That's what inclusive music is. It's also a really safe, beautiful way for children who are English language learners or families who may not have the ability to read in their own language or in the English language to play with English in a very safe, growth modeled way. It's not a proficiency way where you're like, you have to make this sound or you fail. No, that's not how language works. We want to model things without the expectation of children being able to perform on demand. We want to give them opportunities to practice that sound again and again. We want the perception of sound to be really ingrained in their little noggins before we start introducing letters and say, tell me what this letter says. So it's really just this incredibly supercharged teaching vehicle that you have at your disposal at any point. How you integrate it, which sounds you focus on, the kind of language you would want to see in songs that would support functional language development. All of that is what our team does. And it takes a very long time to really see, here's what we're saying in all of these therapeutic areas. How do we map it out so that it's slower, that the children can sing it, that the co-articulation of different sounds is taken out and they can really hear the different parts of a word? And how do you make it so that it's supporting where they're at and maybe the letters that will be introduced first according to the science of reading? So it's been a little bit of a journey for us, but we certainly love our work.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts going into it sounds like the lyrics, the music, the pacing of all those pieces for the program that you've created.
Yeah, we call them the 5 pillars of inclusive music, and it starts with sound focus. There's certain sounds that children are going to be able to make at certain ages that are more gentle and appropriate for where they're at. They're also going to be in alignment with maybe letters they see more often later on in literacy. Those two in the English language kind of go hand in hand. We also have like word use. Oftentimes, music is written from an adult perspective with polysyllabic or multisyllabic words. It's about what feels good to the artist and not what's really good for the child. We try to focus on functional language development, up, down, side, slow, fast. I always use row, row, row your boat as an example. I mean, merrily, 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 please kick that to the curb. I mean, unless you're a 19th century child, that term isn't even going to be relevant, but also from a speech and language like angle, R's and L's, please. So we integrate rowing fast, rowing slow. I mean, these are ways in which you can change the lyrics to match where the child's brain development is. The third pillar is tempo. Things are often much too fast for a child to actually sing. It's just too fast. And remember, this isn't about you singing to them or entertaining them. It's about them singing to you. So the tempo needs to be taken a good look at. Volume is another one. We often say to kids, use your inside voice. And you're like, well, what is that? How have I practiced that? And music is a great place to practice volume. And then pitch is the other thing. I am an older woman, Annie, and my voice just keeps getting lower. And little children have little tiny vocal folds, so I have to sing much higher than I would be comfortable with when I sing with them, or give them music that matches where their ears are going to be able to match their vocal cords to. So you want to think higher than you would normally think.
These are actually good tips just as a teacher if you're thinking teaching younger kids, keeping your voice a little bit higher, keeping the pace and those tempos really, because I never really have considered all those pieces when you're thinking about like you said, music that you include in the classroom. A lot of us do call and responses, and it's kind of that start of that. But yeah, incorporating more of it and with kind of that knowledge is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and using sentence frames, but in music, that is melodic intonation therapy. Sentence frames, but for song, finding beats and tempos to even create full lessons around beats and tempos when it comes to rhyme and rhyme awareness. And I will say for sound awareness, you're going to have to screen a little bit because oftentimes the repetitive sound is not in the title. So you really have to kind of peck and hunt for the things that are going to support that sound you're introducing.
Yeah, yeah, and along with kind of all the background and research you've done, a lot of one thing you mentioned is kind of the joy of learning. You also mentioned a lot of the joy of learning, and so you've made this. Yeah, I think when I was looking kind of through what you do, part of that joy of learning is this dragon you've created that kind of creates a fun dynamic with the students. Can you talk a little bit about how that was created and what's that about? What's the dragon about?
Well, I think when I was thinking about what children are faced with and what they're really interacting with on a screen, oftentimes it's animations because animations are safe. Animations give children a certain set of responses and they're not going to deviate away from those things. Um, that's why we chose animation as what I would call the instructional assistant that goes home. We don't use the animations or the videos in the classroom. We only use them in the home environment. But then I had to come to terms with like, well, did I want this to be a real thing or did I want this to be a completely creative fantasy world? So I went with fantasy world because I didn't want to be getting into like, well, is that a gender specific animal? I'm like, dragons don't exist. So no, they're not. Same with fairies and unicorns. Like I wanted it to be completely because that's where little children live. And it is okay for us to talk about creativity and imagination as much as we do fluency and assessments and data. So we went in the direction of a dragon, and he's adorable. His name is Finnegan, and he's got a whole little cast of friends. And for each dragon, we have mapped out the sounds we want children to be able to focus on at different stages, so that they're able to then going into kindergarten, they're blending, 10 to 14 sounds together to make those early CVC sounds before they even really know that's literacy instruction far before kindergarten, and you don't need 26 letters or 44 phonemes done. You can fade it in. And so having that little guy there as the instructional assistant that goes home and helps parent connect with or families connect with what's going on in the classroom is how we came up with that. But we also wanted something that was a little bit of a data mine to start looking at those sounds and seeing if they are the sounds we're looking for. So everything we do on the screen is sound based, and we're collecting data on those sounds so that teachers can get insight into how a child is doing, how often they're practicing something, what those things would look like in the classroom. And it really does help them make instructional decisions.
Yeah, and I think if I read correctly, there's storytelling involved as well in this process.
Yes, yes, we have storytelling, we have it's character based. So I'm trying to turn off my new phone. It's dinging every 5 seconds. Sorry about that, folks, but I'm like, it's new and I don't know how to turn the dinger off.
It's all
That's
good.
more me than the phone, but it's your error. And also not to be done in the middle of a podcast. So you were saying about
One thing I was curious about was the storytelling element you have with Finnegan the Dragon.
all of our offline things revolve around stories of the dragon or why they do certain things. I had no intention of writing an actual book until my nephew, who named Finnegan Finnegan, said he's very cute, but why is he singing? And I was like, oh, the questions of a 4-year-old. So I had to go write a book that allowed teachers to introduce the character to say Finnegan is this little dragon who doesn't have fire. So he sings. That's why he sings. And for a special education teacher, we always call those coping skills, right? Something that replaces that other thing, gives you that same, I wouldn't even call it a coping skill, a replacement behavior is what it would be. I can't say that singing probably would replace breathing fire, but that's what we have it kind of really crafted in the book. And those books and that plush and the classroom materials are really to help the teacher help connect with the character in the classroom so that when children do go home and see the screen, it's not just a random screen character that comes their way.
Yes, yes, you really thought through the process of it sounds like you've thought really through the storytelling, the music, how it's portrayed, giving students access in more of a tangible way as well. You really kinda have taken your experience and your input business, turned it into something that students can use to benefit themselves. I'm kinda curious, kinda culminating our conversation, as you think about your own journey and reinvention, is there any advice you give to teachers listening who are feeling inspired? They're feeling like this is something that is just feeling good to hear.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you're thinking about it and it keeps coming back to you, then do it. I would say the second thing that you need to do is be okay with being bad. We tend to not like being bad at things because as adults, our brain isn't wired for change. It's not wired for being mediocre. And we think, oh gosh, our egos tend to be much larger than we give them credit for. I mean, they are big. Looking mediocre or bad at something is just going to happen when you first start. You don't have to be the expert in the room. And then listen, talk to people, do informational interviews, ask them for their advice, read up on what's happening in other fields, and be curious about how that could maybe influence your decision to move forward.
Yes, yes, great messages. Are there any final thoughts we haven't yet covered that you want to share with the audience to finish up?
No, I think that this we just went all over the place, but I think it's just, part of it is yes, this is what I love to do, this is what I love to make, but also there are other people out there with things that they have been doing and making for years that don't understand the value in those things they've made. Yeah. And I would encourage you to look into the value of those things that you've made and see if that's something that you would like to pursue outside of the classroom.
Yes, yes. Actually, it's funny because I've had this conversation with a few guests on the podcast about pursuing hobbies and kind of realizing the value you might have inside and outside the classroom. So it's a great finishing note for us to hear. Before I let you go, we always have some fun questions for the audience to get to know you a little better. So just we call them quick questions so you can answer in a phrase or however long you want to answer.
Sure.
The first question is favorite teacher lunch.
Oh, I mean, it's got to be when I took the time to go to Trader Joe's and actually get the Trader Joe's macaroni and cheese, and it was waiting for me at lunch. Yeah, that was it.
That's
Always.
amazing. I love Trader Joe's.
And everyone was always like, "Oh, I should only eat half," and I'm like, "Not me. I'm gonna eat maybe 2."
Right? So good. Your best behavior management tip in a classroom.
Be quiet. Stop talking.
Yeah. A teacher that made a difference in your life.
Mr. McCormick, he was my music teacher in middle school and in high school, and he's still performing. He's still writing music and performing to this day, although he doesn't work in the field of music education anymore. He works in other fields, or he ended his career in other fields. He by far, hands down, him.
And it's interesting you ended up in music. I wonder
Yeah.
if there was an influence there. It's interesting. All right, last question here is last lesson you taught.
Thumb in the ear. It was a social communication lesson on distance between people when you speak. And I was working in a social communication classroom and we were going over thumb in the ear. Like if you could reach out and you could not, you were too close that the thumb was behind the head. The closest you could get to someone is if you put your hand out and you could imagine sticking your thumb in their ear.
Yeah,
That's as close as you want to get.
that's a good lesson to have.
It
Thank you so
doesn't
much.
work. It doesn't work for little kids. It only works for older kids.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for being here, Emily, today. Where can my audience find you if they want to learn more about Finnegan, the dragon? I'll also link it right below this podcast. They can access it that way as well.
You can go ahead and reach out via the website at preludeearlylearning.com. I believe finneganthedragon.com is still up for a few more weeks, but it will be faded out and it'll just be available on preludeearlylearning.com. And you can also just reach out to Emily at preludeearlylearning.com and I will respond personally.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing the comments, and thank you so much for bringing so much value to this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Annie.